So do you want me to get started or?
I think it's best to get started.
Okay, good. Hi, everybody. My name's Libby Nochek, and I am your host for this evening, and I'm representing the Lancaster Association. I do want to let you know that this session is going to be recorded, and then it will be uploaded and posted to the PCC website for people that weren't here to be able to take part and watch. And we do ask that when you're not talking, if you could mute yourself. And if you have problems with that, we have the handy dandy tech guru, Paul Keller, who got the name Penn Central Conference by his picture. So the name of today's workshop is Sustainable Voices. And before we start, I'd like to open with a prayer. And I found this prayer by Averill Stediford. Let us pray. God, who made the world and loves it, and who grieves to see the way that we've hurt the good earth and its diverse creatures, we ask that you awaken us and make us alert to our part in global warming, floods and droughts, polluted seas, starving people, loss of species, dried up farmland, burned up trees. Awaken us, Holy One, to thought and action, and show us how we can turn the tide and ease any suffering, and so that we can live on earth as you have planned. And we know that you have split the atom, you have worked speed through space, you have reached the moon, and you have helped us to learn how to use powers peacefully, where everyone can be blessed. And when the world of good and evil forces us to make a choice, may we give due weight, as you do, to each suffering, pleading voice. God, you who speaks to us, help us to listen, help us to work and vote, pray and sing, change our values, and live more simply to be able to build a better world where your creation thrives. Amen.
Amen.
And now we are passing the torch to Libby Lozer.
Good evening. Bill Wealand and I want to welcome you also to our Sustainable Voices workshop. We will be sharing information about the Church Guide for Faith-Filled Citizenship, and we will introduce 4 speakers who will share their insights on how to lift up our voices as people of faith. We emailed you a brief history of Penn Central's Creation Justice Ministry team, and it had its beginnings in 2012, back when churches were just becoming aware of the consequences of global warming. Tonight, I'm just going to highlight 3 Creation Justice team actions over the years that called for advocating with elected officials. In 2013, we encouraged Penn Central churches to take part in the UCC All Church Initiative Mission for One Earth, during which UCC members nationwide wrote over 51,000 letters to government leaders about our concern for the climate and our need to transition away from burning fossil fuels. At our annual meetings, we have introduced General Synod resolutions for Penn Central endorsement votes on divestment, transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, the use of plastic foam, which was actually written by members of Trinity in Waynesboro, and the Rights of Nature resolution, which asked members, churches, and conferences to advocate for the environment with elected officials. And thirdly, over the years, 22 Penn Central churches became Green Justice congregations and or UCC Creation Justice churches. And that asked in part that the congregations research and inform themselves about environmental justice issues at the local, state, national, and or global levels, and consider how this awareness might lead to congregational advocacy and action. So I would say that interest in advocacy is not exactly new to Penn Central Conference. I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
Good evening. A few years ago, I was able to attend an event that was held at the Whittle Farm, the Lutheran facility, where lots of fruits and vegetables are grown and harvested and donated to hungry people in the neighboring areas. And at that event, a video was shared with the participants, and it included a statement that was made by David Attenborough. And it was the first time that I had heard this kind of report. He said, if nothing changes our planet, the next 75 harvests are the only harvests left for this planet to produce. In other words, at the end of the 75 years, and this statement was made 3 or 4 years ago, at the end of 75 years, this planet will be no longer capable of producing fruits, vegetables, food for all living beings. Much more recently, I was reading a book written by Joanna Macy and Chris Johnston, in which they said this: we can no longer take it for granted that the resources we've depended on, food, fuel, and drinkable water, will be available. We can no longer take it for granted even that our civilization will survive, or that conditions on our planet will remain hospitable for complex forms of life. That statement, written in a book that Joanna and Chris shared in writing, has again underscored the urgency, the critical nature of the sustainable life for future residents of this planet. That caused me to really do some serious introspection, talking to myself, telling myself, even though I'm not going to be around 75 years from now, I have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren who will be here, who will be struggling with some of these issues and will be fed or not, depending on the actions that we take in our lifetime today. And so it was that concept, that concern, that led the members of our working group to talk about how we could help to energize our leaders, our national leaders, our state leaders, our local leaders, to take more seriously the urgency of action needed to change the way in which we are damaging our planet. As we started to talk to one another, we began to think about ways that we could help local churches to address the task of encouraging and urging our elected officials to address this issue more seriously and with more determination to solve some of these problems. I want to share with you a memory that occurred to me sometime as we were beginning this process. I was in the 4th grade, and the teacher of that 4th grade class was trying to help us to discover the concept of democracy. And she was standing in front of the room of 4th graders, and she looked at one particular 4th grader and asked if he would go to the chalkboard. And of course he did. And she said, "I would like you to write what I'm thinking." And she said nothing else. And the young student stood at the chalkboard and waited and waited And finally, he turned around to the teacher and said, "I can't write what you're thinking if you don't tell me." And she smiled and she turned and looked at the class and she said, "And that's the challenge of the democracy in which we're living in this country. We elect leaders and we expect those leaders to represent us. And the only way that can truly take place is if we tell them what we're thinking, what our concerns are, what our needs are. And if enough of us tell them, they will be inclined to take it seriously and to try to do something about it." It's kind of fascinating to me that that fourth grade experience has lived in my memory all this time. And yet, I rarely have taken the time to sit down and write or text or email or call anyone who has been elected to represent me in the challenges facing government of our world, of our planet, of our country, of our state of Pennsylvania, and of our counties and our school districts. And those challenges are challenges that our future generations are going to look back on and ask themselves, why didn't they do something? Or say to themselves, thank goodness that they did something. So it was that kind of energy, that kind of awareness that led us as a working team to begin the challenge of creating this assistance, this book of ideas, this book of suggestions that can guide a congregation through the process of organizing a way to talk to their leaders in ways that will let the leaders know what it is that people are concerned about, what people care about, what people hope for. So that was what gave birth to the guide for local churches to use. Libby?
Okay, I wanted to add to that just a little bit. For me, I have not also taken a lot of time to write. Occasionally I do, but not a lot. And my church has dabbled in writing letters to elected officials over the last few years, but very sporadically. And when I attended, there was a UCC Creation Justice webinar about getting Congress to act. It was in early 2022. And the webinar focused specifically on how people of faith can best organize themselves to place pressure on Congress to act for the good of the climate. All four speakers, including a member of Congress, were insistent that people of faith would be heard and their individual and collective voices mattered. I'm going to put the link to that video in case you're interested in it. But it gave me hope that my church and me, that we could take an active part in our democracy and give voice to our values and vision of a just and habitable planet. And as Bill said, the Creation Justice team, decided that this was something that we wanted to work on. We began to talk together about what would encourage our churches to begin to engage in advocating for a habitable planet. Some interested team members met outside of our monthly meetings to get ideas on paper and proceeded to create the church guide for faith-filled citizenship, which just sort of is hot off the press. We realize it's a work in progress, needing the input of churches who try it out, but we offer it to our Penn Central churches for you to consider and use as a resource for getting started in conversations with elected officials about the issues that your congregation cares about. Now, we were going to have a speaker here, but we will wait until she joins us. Bill, do you want to go ahead with the danger of underestimating the value?
Sure.
Okay.
In the early stages of writing this booklet, a booklet about how a church might organize itself and introduce members and begin the work of identifying issues of critical importance to their neighborhood, to their school district, to their state, and of course, to the planet. How they might not only identify those critical issues, how they might begin to gather information about which of those issues were most urgent, which were most likely to endanger the citizens of this planet, and what are some of the things that might be done to slow down the danger, the development of the dangerous situation, and ultimately bring it to conclusion. And in that process of searching and trying to develop a method, we began to think about how to first introduce this to a church, to its leadership, to its pastor, to its friends and neighbors. And so the booklet includes a section that encourages people to gather together, the few in the congregation who have already demonstrated their willingness to be active in communicating to those who are responsible for managing our work at trying to minimize the danger to our planet. How to not only identify them, but how to learn what they've been doing, what they've not been doing, how to learn what are some of the important things that might be done to minimize the risks, the dangers, to enable recoveries, and to find ways to do better at caring for the environment. Things, for example, like no plow farming, which is a concept that is gradually, slowly beginning to be taken seriously by more and more farmers that are able to produce significant growth and crops without having to plow the soil in which those seedlings or seeds are planted. And so it is in a way kind of exciting to think about a congregation that will take seriously its role in identifying issues, identifying problems, identifying potential things that can be done to minimize or reduce or eliminate the risks to our future environment, and to begin then to communicate with those who are responsible for making decisions about how to best respond to these challenges. And in that context, I think it's important at the very beginning for all of us to be able to say to one another, this is not a political exercise in the sense that it's encouraging people to stand with or for or against or over one party or it's not about parties. It's not about political support of one party or the other. It's about encouraging those who are already in office to address these issues that are so very important to the future of our planet, to my great grandchildren's lives, as they will be experiencing them decades from now. So we hope that people won't get tangled up in the concern that that this is a kind of thing that churches shouldn't be involved in because we shouldn't be opposing or supporting one party or the other. That's not what this is all about. This is about addressing the issues and making democracy work, making people who are elected to make decisions about our planet and its future know that we care, that we have done research, and that we find some ideas that are worth trying, and that we want to ask them to at least give a good try at solving some of these problems. So Libby, back to you.
I did see that our representative, Carol Hill, has come back on and has joined us. And so, Libby Lozer, do you think it's okay if I introduce her? So I'm not sure where Libby, there's two Libbys here. So Carol Hill, Representative Carol Hill Evans, I think I saw you sign on.
Yes, I'm here.
We'd love to hear from you.
Oh,
So are you okay with, are you ready?
I am ready.
Thank you so much.
So thank you, everyone. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me, for allowing me to be part of your event tonight. It's always good to be able to talk to those who think the same way, who have the same goals, who want to live on an earth that is safe and friendly for all of us. And so I am State Representative Carol Hill Evans. I represent the 95th Legislative District in York County here in Pennsylvania. And that includes the city of York, Spring Garden Township, West York Borough, as well as North York Borough. I've been in this position now, this is my 7th year, so my 4th term. I came here by way of having served 9 years on York City Council. And when the opportunity came for me to move to this position, I raised my hand, I got involved. I just assumed that it would be a better way for me to get things done at a different level. So why the environment? When I was 9, my grandparents bought a farm. They bought 27 acres, and it then became our job as kids, and my parents, of course, to raise our own vegetables. And we would raise our vegetables. We each had an acre. Each one of my aunts and uncles, including my parents, had an acre, and we chose to farm ours. And so that's what got me first started with just loving to have my hands in the earth. There's something very healing about being able to run your hands, get your hands in the soil, to plant seeds, to see that things actually grow that you can eat, and to taste the difference between buying store-bought and picking one right out of the garden. I love to pick things out of the garden. I love it. It's just, as you all know, if any of you are gardeners, you know the difference in the taste. Sometimes the things that you're tasting are almost unrecognizable. You never knew a tomato could taste so sweet, or that blueberries could be not moldy tasting, that they actually taste like berries. And so over the years, some years ago, I became a master gardener through Penn State Cooperative Extension. And it was a learning experience that I will not forget, because it gave me knowledge about how important things were that I took for granted, things that I didn't even know, and how important the things that we do in life can affect our planet. And so just carrying that along with me throughout my life has just made me a believer in recycling, in planting trees, in growing gardens, in teaching about all of the things that help us here on Earth, and how to get along with those who have longer, more legs than we do, are you know, and have wings, and how we all just, we're here, we all have our own places, but we all belong to this earth, and this earth belongs to all of us. So when I came to the house, I was immediately brought onto the climate caucus. So learning different things about the climate and how it's affecting us, it just always makes me just shake my head and smile when I hear about the fact that there is nothing going on with the climate. It's the same as it has always been. And I'm sorry, I'm old enough to know that that just is not true. Growing up, we had snows that would come up to our waist that we would have to walk through in order to get to school. I can remember thunderstorms, but I don't ever remember them being quite as severe as they are now, or as frequent. They just seem to be a lot more violent. And then learning about the earth and the atmosphere gives you a better understanding of it. It's just as frightening, but it does give you a better understanding of it. And it just teaches us, you know, the things, what our part is in making sure that we leave this earth better than when, you know, when we leave it, that we leave it better for those that are coming behind us. And I have to tell you, that's kind of a hard lesson. I think the generation behind me still doesn't quite get it. But I think like my grandchildren, they get it. They're being taught it in school. We take them out into the parks all the time. Nature walks, we take them so that they can see the animals in their own habitats. And it's important for everybody, I think, to know where our own individual place is on this earth. And so that's kind of my story. That's kind of my philosophy. I am a huge recycler. My one daughter lives in Texas and the other one lives in Maryland. And I have been known to, well, not the one from Texas, but when I go to Maryland, they don't recycle in the area where she is. So I'm bringing bottles and cans and papers here back home with me so I can recycle them. It just drives me nuts that they don't recycle. So anyway, if you have any questions, I'm certainly happy to answer any questions.
Anybody can unmute if they have a question or place it in the chat, and we'll get to those questions.
I have a question. What, as a state legislator, what kind of voices from the community speak loudest to you, or how is it best for people to make their priorities known to their state legislators?
So I will speak for myself. For me, it's about being in the community. So I came here through the community. It was the community that supported me. So I feel like it's only fair for me to be out in the community with those that have voted me to be their voices. And the only way that I can know what their concerns are and know what it is they are asking me to do is if I'm speaking to them. So whenever I'm invited to events, I try to make it to the events. I'm knocking on doors during, you know, times that we are not running for re-election. I'm on the doors. I want to hear what everybody has to say. So for me, it's face to face. I try to make myself as accessible as possible, but I know everybody doesn't do that. So whenever there is an issue or something that we want to get, you know, the public's opinion on, I always tell everybody, write to not just your legislator, but every legislator in the House of Representatives. Do it by mail. We get postcards. A lot of times we'll get like stacks of postcards from an organization that's trying to get our attention. That gets your attention. It lets you know that there is such importance behind this, that people are taking the time to write a postcard, to put a stamp on it, and to put it in the mail. So mail is important. Email. Flood the emails. That will absolutely get your legislators' attention. Phone calls, maybe, maybe not. It's not too often. Like, I'm more likely to make the phone call to a constituent than I am to answer because I have staff. And so they're more likely to be the ones to actually answer the phone call. So I would say mail, email, like snail mail, email, and then just go to their office. I mean, very often I have constituents that come in. A lot of folks know me, so they say, yeah, well, you know, we're family, or I knew her from high school, or, you know, I used to babysit her, or whatever the case may be. And if I happen to be there, then of course, they're certainly welcome to do that. And then we can have conversations. Legislators, like as a legislator, I'm stopped when I go to church. If I see people, they have a question, they ask me. If I'm the grocery store, the car wash, filling my gas tank, whatever it is, whenever I'm out there and people, you know, recognize me and they have a question, I want to be sure that they feel free to ask me those questions. Because the only way, and I tell everybody, especially like I go into the schools a lot. So when I'm talking to the children, I let them know that, you know, actually they're my boss. And they're the ones, it's them and their parents that put me where I am. So if they have a concern, I need to know about it. I want to know about it. And I want to know, you know, what it is, what solution they might think they have, or what solution they think, you know, we could come up with that would make it easier and better for them. We don't have all the answers. We don't even pretend to. And very often, a lot of the bills and resolutions that we do are as a result of having conversations with our constituents. They're the ones that give us the ideas because they're the ones that are experiencing whatever, you know, the issue might be. And for me, nothing is more important than hearing the words come right from the constituent. You know, hearing them tell their story. They'll often say, well, you should go to Harrisburg and say this, or you should go to Harrisburg and say that. And I invite them to come to Harrisburg and tell their own story, because I can tell it, but I didn't live it. And so no one tells their own story better than that person themselves. And those are the words, those are the kinds of, when we have panelists that are serving on a panel discussion, having those discussions with them and hearing their stories are the most compelling way to really grasp the attention of a legislator.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
And yeah, and thanks for just being brave enough and committed enough to serve.
You're welcome. It still is an honor. It's not without challenges. But it continues to be an honor and really a blessing to be able to serve. It just is so humbling to know that the same streets that I played on, the same streets that I, you know, used to ride my bike on and everything are now the streets that I have to care about. They're the ones that I have to make sure funding is available for repair. Some of the, you know, the same people that I grew up with are still living here. And now I'm in a position, and it's a blessing to be in a position that I can provide whatever, you know, resources and needs that they have. So thank you. It is being brave, but it's also really, for me, truly a blessing.
When
So tell me a little bit about your organization, if you would, please. I did read I read the short bio, but are you all from Pennsylvania?
so let's hand that over to Libby and Bill.
Okay.
And Libby, Lozer and Bill might be able to weigh in on that. And I just want to say I'm really impressed with you, Carol. I'm on the other side of the river, so I haven't had a chance to hear you before, but you're really impressive. One question that I do have for you before we pass it over to Libby and Bill is, do you find a conflict sometimes when you're talking about budgeting? And so you were talking about, for instance, repairs. And sometimes when we're doing repairs, or if we have something to repair, sometimes budgets come in and it's easier to cut down trees and not replace them and pave something. Do you find that balance difficult? And how can we as citizens, local citizens, help, you know, our leaders navigate that system?
Yes, it is. It's very difficult to know where the money needs to go to have the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. And it becomes very difficult. We just yesterday on the floor had a conversation about our environmental resources and how everybody complains because our parks are not up to what they should be, or our rivers are just dirty, nasty. And so we know that we need to make changes, but how do we make those changes? Where does the money come from?
Yeah.
And how can we affect that? And you're right, it is easier to make trees, but as a legislature, we really do have to get very serious about the environment. We have made, we've made some progress, but it seems like every time there's a cut, they want to cut the environmental budget, which to me makes no sense. You can't have clean rivers if you're cutting the budget, and people are able to go and do whatever they want to, unregulated, or breaking the law but not having to pay any penalties. In other words, accountability. And if you don't have the staff to do it, it doesn't get done. So we're looking into ways to increase the staff, then the staffing levels, to increase the certification for those who are responsible for our parks and outdoor areas. But it's a tough ask, and we do the best that we can. We don't always succeed the way we know we ought to. Excuse me, but we do know that we have to do something. And so we are working. We have very many caucuses. We get together, we bring in experts that can help us to decide how to make things happen that need to happen, whether it's more volunteers, whether it's more funding, whether it's different programs, whether it's cutting back on some programs that are not necessarily well used, and increase the funding for those programs that are being used that can help us.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Passing
We
it over
have
to Bill and Libby to answer those questions.
Okay, well, before that, there's one more question in the chat for Carol, and it's from Jeff and Jane Leister. It says, in what area do you think we can be most successful in moving something forward in Pennsylvania to improve our environment?
If you have an issue, like if you have a main concern, let's just say, I can't think of what it is, what it would be. Let's just say recycling. Get a group together, create a bill. You have to say what the bill is going to do. You have to say what result it's going to bring. And then talk to stakeholders, people who can help you, not just to create the bill, because we have plenty of people at the House of Representatives that's their job. They're the ones that actually put the language together. But as I said earlier, if there is a specific concern that you're trying to address, or some result that you're looking for, we just need to know what that is. And then over conversations, like I personally have gone to meetings where these kind of conversations were being had, and I brought staff along with me. And so we just ask all the questions around what your concern is so that we can get a good background. Then we'll take that to our research bureau. We'll have them do research. Is there something already in the law that says these things need to be addressed, that addresses this issue? If it is, then maybe that bill or that law needs to be amended. So we can make amendments to improve the law. And then we have to make sure that they're enforceable. And so we need to make language in the bill that makes it, really enforceable, because there's no sense in having a bill if it can't be enforced or if you don't have enough people to enforce it. So it's just words on a paper. And I personally try to stay away from that. But that's kind of what you do. Have all of your thoughts together. Kind of come up with a plan and then present it to your state legislator, and don't let them get away with just saying, I'll get back with you, and then not get back with you. You have to hold our feet to the fire. And I say our because I'm part of that. And there are times when I get so busy, which we all are, but I get so busy that I forget. So I always tell people, just circle back around, make sure. And I get that a lot. People are saying, thank you for meeting with us. We met 3 weeks ago. Has there been any results? that to me is just makes my mind go to back to the meeting. And then if I haven't been able to do anything, it kicks me into gear, because I don't like people to think that I'm unresponsive. And I think it's important, because we are representatives that we should be representing, not ourselves, but those within our district. And so that's the best way to do it. Have all your thoughts together, reach out to your state representative, ask for a meeting. And if you don't get it, if they say no the first time, keep asking because the more they hear from you, the more they're going to want to make you go away. So if making you go away means meeting with you, then you'll get your meeting. But don't let them get away with saying, well, I don't have time. Yes, we're in June, and June is extremely busy because of the budget, but that's okay. We still should make time, and we do, even if it's in July. But that's the best course of action. Have your plans, have what it is you're looking for, reach out to your legislator, ask for a meeting, and then take it from there.
Wow. Thank you so much, Carol.
You're welcome.
That was, that's just inspiring to hear. And we just appreciate so much that you were willing to share some time with us today.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
You're welcome to stay on. Oh, now we forgot. You had a question about our role here.
Yes.
Our church, the United Church of Christ in Penn Central Conference, is having its annual meeting this week. And this is one of our annual meeting workshops. And so the Creation Justice team has been working on this church guide for faith-filled citizenship. And so we're sharing that with churches, and in hopes that it will inspire some churches to take some action on some of the issues that they see in their locale. And so thank you so much for all your words of wisdom and tips, and we really appreciate it. So,
and don't forget a lot of people think that, well, she's so busy, she can't do this. We're all busy. And there will be times where we just can't make it, but there will be times that we can. Yeah. So invite your legislator to come and worship with you. I do that, I try to do that as often as I can, but not for recognition, but just to get to know who you are. Mm-hmm. And that really does help. It helps me as a legislator. Again, I can speak for myself. It really does help me. I was raised in the church. And so for me, it's just, kind of second nature, but for a lot of us, it isn't. But don't be afraid to ask, to invite your legislator, any elected official to come and worship with you. That's an honor. It's an honor for us to be able to be invited and to be able to do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. We're going to move ahead here. Okay. Our next agenda.
Well, thank you so much. I am going to sign off, but it's been a pleasure being here, and thank you so much for the invite. I do appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Okay, take care now.
Okay, so we're going to look at identifying local issues here. And as your group begins to consider what issues are most important for your church, it might be good to start with local issues and local office holders. Are air, land, water, or people being impacted by environmental issues in your community? As each church considers their local area's issue, each church's list is going to look different. But to get you thinking, we have 3 local issue examples to share with you that are real and that are current, and that could be issues that churches might want to work on. First one, currently in Danville area of our conference, the Middle Susquehanna River Keepers and local citizens are concerned and are speaking up with their questions about a company that is seeking permits to build a plastics recycling plant along the Susquehanna. which could impact the water quality and downstream communities. Churches along the Susquehanna can make their concerns known during the permitting process and also share their concerns with their local officials. This is a tough one as it is a recycling plant with the presumed purpose of upcycling plastic, bringing more jobs, and yet there is great environmental impact that's significant. So there's a lot of conversation on that. Second example, many communities are losing natural spaces, wooded areas or farmland to development. We have churches in Penn Central who have created community gardens, pollinator gardens, planted trees on church land, or assisted in regenerating forests. These actions are important in decreasing carbon emissions and in giving us sacred spaces where we can experience nature. These churches can also use their voices to ask their state and local government to prioritize the creation and maintenance of natural space for our physical, mental, and planet health, and to enact laws that would encourage this. And a third example, there is current legislation in Pennsylvania, Senate Bill 550, on community solar, with the goal to make it easier for people who rent or who have a roof that is not suitable for solar to take part in supporting and benefiting from solar. Interested churches could ask their Pennsylvania rep or senator to co-sponsor or vote yes on the community solar bill and thus lend their support to an earth-friendly outcome. We do have an increasing number of churches who are researching solar roofs for their churches. So we're going to segue here a minute and introduce Marilyn Schertzer from Trinity UCC in Mountville in Lancaster County, who will give us a brief update on their solar roof project. You all have a friend in Penn Central in a UCC church here that is paving the way in using renewable energy, and they may have tips to share. Marilyn, are you ready?
Yes. So it was a master gardener, our diligent treasurer, who raised the question, and as we as all churches after the pandemic looked at our finances, raised the question of looking into solar, not only to save money, but also to help move in a greener way. And since I'm a native Pennsylvanian. However, I left in my 20s and I returned in 2015 after living 30 years in Vermont. And I thought Lancaster County would be like Vermont, and I was so disappointed and was grieving quite a bit, and willingly took on the task. Sorry for that. So that was on a Tuesday, and by Friday morning, my friend in the Central Penn Green team, my neighbor in Elizabethtown, had sent me an email about a solar talk that was being given in Highland Presbyterian Church in Lancaster. And I found that talk was by Greenworks Development CEO. And I found it very interesting and enlightening. I learned that the sun in one day produces enough electricity to support all the energy the world uses in a year. And I also learned that we are definitely we don't even have a current solar goal, because the last solar goal for Pennsylvania was 8% in 2021. Anyway, I took on the task of, and I got a recommendation from Greenworks Development, they're located in Harrisburg, but they do major projects, and they do it's a lot of big finance in their work, but he was kind enough to give me the name of a contractor who uses the same materials, quality materials, good warranties. And I have that name for you, Brett Nolt, with Twilight Renewables, and he's now in Manchester. I'm sorry, in Manheim, here in Lancaster County. And actually, I just got an email before this session that was in February 22. And I just got a notice from the president of our executive team that we got a new contract for this current year, because naturally costs have gone up. And I started the feasibility study in 2022. So if you're interested in a solar project, now is the time because of the IRA. So I thought I'd just briefly go over what you need to do if you wanted to look into it for your own churches. What you need to start is with a feasibility study with people who know something about your building, how old your roof is. Well, first of all, you need to analyze your electricity use for the last 12 months, how many kilowatt hours and what the cost was. And then look at where you would want to put this. How old's your roof? If it's more than 10 years, you may want to think about replacing it. But look at that, and also whether you want it on the ground. So if you develop a team, it'd be good to have members that know something about the building or the grounds, to decide where to put it. Because if you put it on the ground, you also may want to look about whether you need a fence. If you're like us, we're near a park, right next to a park. So I was able to gather 2 previous consistory people who had knowledge of both the grounds and also the building, and we decided that our roof was the safest place to put our solar. Anyway, you need to find a contractor. I have the name of Twilight Renewables is who we're using, and like I said, we just got a new contract tonight. And we got from him. Normally, what makes it really easy now is that we got a construction. Part of the contract is like a construction. There's different stages that you have to pay during the construction. So at the end of this, let me go to what we did next. Was then I took it to the executive team. It took a little while, and finally we took it to a vote to the church. And we do have there were some negative voices, but the main concern was about whether we were going to be even in existence in 8 years. Okay, so there was concerned about whether we could afford to do this, but we all agreed to go forward to see about the feasibility of it and to apply for grants. So, but in order to apply for grants, you would need to show on the form, how much the church was willing to give. And so I developed a pledge form. And so we went through that process of asking for cash donations and pledges over 3 years, and or ability to or willingness to help with any fundraisers to help towards this project. And we, the treasurer and I got together and did a little cover letter, explaining that to take into consideration in filling out the pledge form to continue the current giving to the function of the church. So that this would be an addition. And before the year was out, the IRA came through. And before we were able to even apply for the grant, we had knowledge of the 30% rebate we get. And anyway, it sort of like all fell into place. So to so we've actually I sent out 50 pledge forms. We got 25 back, and we our small congregation actually came up with over 50% of our goal. And so with the Inflation Reduction, so we applied for a $10,000 grant, and I also suggested that we go ahead and with the start of the new calendar year, start people, if they wish to start giving their money towards the pledges. And so so that we would save interest on a loan. But the idea was of the 3-year pledges was that we could take out, Cornerstone does offer 3-year solar loans at 4% interest, that we could finance it that way. But by getting a head start, we now have $12,000 in the bank already for this project. I did set up a meeting with Cornerstone, talk with the director of loaning at Cornerstone Funds in Ohio, and discovered that they're willing to front 30%. If the church would need the 30%, they would front that in a loan, as long as you pay it back as soon as you get it back. The main and how it would work was, and she recommended that first they would give us the money for the construction loan, because normally during the construction, our contract has 4 different payments, and they would handle that, but we'd have to apply for that loan. And during that time period, you'd only pay interest on the money that has been given out. And once the construction is completed, then we would do renegotiate. We would a solar loan at the 4% interest, and for the first 3 years. And at that time, when we do that, we can put any money that we have received, pay that down, so we don't have to borrow as much money as the construction loan was. So that's a good savings. And of course, they would like us to pay the 30% back immediately so that they can pass it on to other churches wanting to do solar projects. So, and they were, and they can give loans up to $100,000. The other fact I learned from her was that, or we learned from her was that um, um, okay, was that any grants that you have that you receive are not included in the 30%. So for instance, if our project cost 54,000 and we get a $10,000 grant, we would only get a rebate of 30% of $44,000. So that's just another little fact. But anyway, and I'm open if anybody is, you know, I'm willing to talk with anybody who wants to consider this for their church, to share more details and like the pledge form I developed and that sort of thing.
Thank you, Marilyn. I think we'll make sure that we put your name and your email in the chat so people can access that if they have questions. So, thank you so much for sharing. That's exciting for your church. Yeah. I think we're going to move now. I see that Michael Nuroff and Thaddeus are on. So we're going to move to that and have them share with us. Both of them are guests with us from the UCC Office of Public Policy and Advocacy in Washington, D.C. To share about what they do, what their office might help churches do, and some words of encouragement and tips in dealing with advocacy. And Reverend Michael is an ordained minister in the UCC and serves as acting director of the Office of Public Policy and Advocacy, and has served for 15 years as the UCC's policy advocate for international issues. Thaddeus is the Justice and Peace Policy Fellow in the UCC Office of Public Policy and Advocacy in DC. So we welcome you, and we are looking forward to hearing what you might have to say for us.
Absolutely. First off, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having both of us with you for this great event. Thank you, Libby, for your outreach and your organizing work, and just bring a warm welcome to you from our office to you there in the Penn Central Conference. We're really excited about this work and this guide, the Faith-Filled Citizenship Guide, which we feel like really is a lot of what we do in Washington as well. So I know we have just about 15 minutes with you, so we'll keep it short and sweet and leave some time for questions. I know you just had Representative Carol Hill Evans on, and so I caught the very tail end of her, and I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to say that might overlap with what she shared. But the prompt that Libby had sent to us, I'm going to start with the first maybe 2 points, and then I'm going to turn it over to Thaddeus. But the first point that Libby, you asked us to share about was really the importance of congregations communicating with elected officials. Why do they listen? This is a fundamental question that we wrestle with every day. We have to make the case for them to listen. As much as it seems like you have a good representative there in York, in Representative Hill Evans, who may see things, in closer alignment to your values. In many cases, others of you may have members who are very different in terms of how they feel about issues. And so whether or not they agree or disagree, it's up to us to make the case. And so first and most simply to say is that your voice matters. You're a constituent and you're a person of faith, and both those things are currency that are valuable in both your state house and in Washington, D.C. You hopefully, when you set up a meeting or you're sharing information with your member, you're bringing issue expertise to them. Many of these offices have, need to cover, like our office in DC, many different issues. And like our office, they oftentimes, are understaffed. There's a few staff that are trying to cover whole swaths of public policy and a variety of issues. And so oftentimes when advocates come, you're bringing expertise to them. As much as you may not think that you're an expert on these issues, your research and preparation really are oftentimes more than what some of those staff have done on the issue that you're bringing forward. And so first, go into the meeting with confidence, knowing that you're an expert on this issue. Also, you're bringing insight from your community. That is really such a value to these offices, of really bringing the story, your personal story, or the story of your church or your community. That is what they need to hear. That is what will make the meeting memorable for them. So those are just some quick tips on kind of why your voice matters. And I'll share a little bit more about kind of what makes your message effective when you go into these meetings. And so Libby had asked about kind of the different weight that a letter or a visit might have with a member. And so what I'll say to start is that really, the more effort it takes, the more impact it will have. And so when you think about your engagement, your activity, you think about the time and effort that you're willing to put into it, because the staffers, when they receive the message, they'll know how much time it took you to make that call or to write that letter or whatever it is that you're doing. So there's a little bit of a hierarchy in terms of effectiveness when it comes to this kind of advocacy. Certainly, a personal visit is most effective. Really, in all of this type of issue advocacy work, it's about trying to build relationships. And so the more regular you can connect with the staff, the more regular you can connect with the office, and the more personal you can become, that is really the gold standard of what is possible. But we also know that not all of us have the time to do that. We are fortunate in DC, we get to do a lot of this work on a daily basis, and we work with the broad faith community in our work, who also bring relationships. And so our voice gets magnified on a daily basis in terms of what we do and the impact that we can have. But we know that our work in DC is really about building on your voices, the voice of the United Church of Christ and the voice of our grassroots. And that's really the voice that you bring as well, is the voice that you collect from your community, the stories that you share. So a personal visit is most effective. A handwritten letter is maybe second on the list of effectiveness. They can tell that this is a form letter versus something that is handwritten, that people went through the trouble to handwrite, no matter how messy your handwriting is, that you sat down with old school pen and paper and wrote to them a note about what you care about. That goes a long way. A phone call is also valuable, because they know that you took the time to pick up the phone and dial the number and ask to speak to someone, as scary as that may be, and share your perspective on this issue. And then below that is really a lot of the work that we do. We do a lot of direct visits, and And we try to do some creative campaigning in a lot of what we do so that it catches some attention. But a lot of our work in DC is also about collecting signatures and trying to show, broader public support. And so we do a lot of what we call action alerts. We're sending out kind of form letters to all of you in the church. We have a list that's called the Justice and Peace Action Network, which I'll share the link to here in a minute. That is essentially every week our office sends out an action alert on a different issue, and hundreds of people from the United Church of Christ send those letters to their members of Congress. But those letters in those action alerts, we draft a little message that gets sent automatically when you click through. But you also have an opportunity to personalize those messages. And so I encourage you, when you do take action like that, which I'm sure many of you have done, to try to personalize that as much as you can, because that also makes those messages more effective. I saw a study that showed that email, even just email, not handwritten mail, but email coming from a real person, not an office or not a form letter, resulted in 46% more opens and 7 times more clicks than a newsletter style email. That's research actually from the University of Pennsylvania. So always think about the time and effort you're putting into it, and always personalize the message. And with that, in that personalization, even if this is a letter or an email, try to personalize it. Try to share a story, because that is what, again, will make your communication memorable compared to others who may just be sharing their opinion about issues. I'll offer 2 other quick tips in terms of messaging and communications. Social media is kind of a growing field of advocacy. Our office, we have social media accounts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we try to leverage our voice as well on those platforms. And so following your member, tweeting at them, direct messaging them, all those are effective ways of communicating as well, because right now so many of the offices are inundated with so many emails that any other type of way you can get your message out is pretty effective. And finally, writing op-eds is certainly still an old school but always effective way to get attention to your issue. And you don't necessarily need to get an op-ed posted in the New York Times or the Washington Post. If you're really trying to affect your member, the more local the paper, the better, because they have staff who every day are looking for mentions of their boss in local papers. And so the more you can write an op-ed and mention your member and ask them to support your issue, their staff are going to clip that article and they're going to share that with their boss and say, look, Libby from Pennsylvania cares a lot about this issue. So let me stop there, in part because Thaddeus really works the closest on these issues. And I already heard some mention of regulations and things I know Thaddeus can speak to. But since he does so much work on environment, I wanted to give him a chance to speak to kind of how to talk about these specific issues with your members.
All right, thanks, Mike. So again, I'm Thaddeus Elliott. I am the Justice and Peace Policy Fellow here in our Washington, D.C. office. But part of my portfolio of issues that I help cover does include our environmental and energy policy. Also want to give a shout out to Bill. I remember him from our time together in Florida. I was on the Florida Conference Board of Directors for a while, so it's good to see Bill again here. So yeah, so I do a lot following environmental policy, and I do a lot of advocacy visits with different offices. We've done them in working for getting the IRA passed and Build Back Better. But also more recently, we're doing a lot around permitting reform. So you may have heard of like Senator Manchin's Dirty Deal type work, and also the new farm bill that's being worked on has a lot of sustainability pieces in the conservation titles, in terms of agriculture practices, and making our food system greener as well. And so one of the points Libby had asked us to touch on was, how do you message when you're going into a visit with a representative, or you're sending a communication to a member who doesn't, like, they're not on your, they don't share the same view or have the same policy position of what you're asking for? How do you go about negotiating that? And so I like to think of it as, this is when you're really putting on your persuasion hat. So if you're talking to a member for whom they aligned, you know, for example, they're really in favor of renewables, often we go into those meetings thinking about, what can we do to bolster you or to help support you, or rally some more folks? Who else do we need to talk to? You're thinking more of a support role when you're talking to someone who's a proponent for the issue that you're for. If you're going into a meeting where you need to really persuade someone to get on board, the best thing to do is to first go to their website, that member's website, or look at their kind of issues to figure out, how are they, what do they care about? What are their values? How do they see a particular issue? So pretty much any member is going to have a position on energy, for example. And so just kind of look at, okay, what are the energy proposals that they have? And also, why do they support that? If you're in a community, for example, that has a very extraction-based economy, whether it's a former mining town, gas extraction, fracking, anything like that, you may want to use like an economic argument, probably, if you want to transition away from fossil fuels and extraction. So finding out ways that you can kind of speak their language, so to speak, without watering down your own viewpoint or standpoint. So you find an end to be able to start a conversation that isn't so much like acrimonious, but gets you kind of finding a way that you can start working in. And then, like has been iterated before, using personal stories or talking about the impacts of a policy decision on your community in your area helps a lot of times, more than just going in with facts and statistics. So we can talk about what the science says about climate change, but being able to connect, you know, changes, you know, what the science says to the actual weather phenomena that you're experiencing in your community, and what the impacts of that are. What's the impact of like more severe storms, for example, in your community? If you have a personal story, if you have a friend or a neighbor, or even something that you saw on the news that you're aware of, those things are important to bring in, and they help humanize it. You're also making connections to places that they know about. You may have a personal connection to your member if they're from the same area, or you may have mutual friends in common. You may have been a part of the same professional networks. So whenever you can bring stories about places and communities that the member would also know, that can help you get over maybe like a political rhetorical hurdle, and that opens another doorway. So that's always an effective route to go. Just find those common points that you have and build off of that. And,
Thanks, Thaddeus. I put in the chat our Justice Peace Action Network link. That is really one way to be in touch with our office. as well as our recent action alert that Thaddeus drafted on the Environmental Justice for All Act. Are there questions, thoughts that folks have? That we're here for a little bit longer to lend our expertise and partnership.
One question that came up before you came on, but it might be something you could help with. The PA solar goal, are there any current PA solar goals that you're aware of?
We would not be, since our office focuses only on tracking federal level policy. So we would know anything that's circulating through like Congress or the administration. So yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
can't help with that one. But I think, I heard a little bit of Marilyn's presentation about, there certainly is a lot of interest in the United Church of Christ around greening our churches and making our churches themselves more sustainable. And there's the ministry of our building ministry and our community, the way in which that can support community and also, lessen the burden on the grid. All those are really important values. And my only ask is that we don't stop there, that there's a side of our work that also connects to kind of looking upstream at the impact that public policy has, and that we also lend our voice to some of those issues that are impacting the broader community outside of our church. So that's where our office comes in. That's where our partnership, comes in, and we are certainly, again, we're happy to be a resource to you in many different ways. We can certainly share information from our office. We can also help set up meetings if you ever would want to come to Washington to do direct advocacy or lobby visits. We can be a resource to you there. And we would love also to receive stories from you if there are stories that we can share in our advocacy work. We really would love more and more for our work to become bi-directional, that it's not just our office sending out action alerts and information, but also we're receiving stories back of how to do our work better, but also stories that in our advocacy that we can share of how these policies really are impacting communities. And so we too often here in DC are a little bit disconnected from, we're members of local churches too, but oftentimes these policies are impacting our country in other communities and other states. And that's harder for us sometimes to get our finger on to be able to really share. And so we welcome those stories collected from local churches and maybe filtered through the conference as well. So.
And there's also many opportunities in our coalition work where we have meetings that we're always looking to bring in a constituent voice, especially when we're trying to press a key member, for example, to either get them to sign on board a piece of legislation or to kind of rally their peers. And I know, for example, Senator Fetterman is on the Senate Committee for Environment and Public Works, especially and on the subcommittees for environmental justice, waste management, regulation and oversight. Those are all big key things. And so I could see, especially as we talk more about energy permitting reform, that's very necessary in terms of onlining more renewable energy sources on a larger scale. So this is about supplying whole states and regions with clean renewable energy and hooking them into the power grid. That's getting a lot of activity right now in the Senate with a lot of different proposals. And so I definitely see some opportunities to bring in some more constituent voices to some of those meetings. And so it's always good to be able to have folks that we can go call on, especially if you're representing a larger kind of coalition of bodies. So like your congregations or the conference, that's always a big plus for us.
I had a thought and a question.
Mhm.
So the representative, I forget her name, from York, who spoke earlier, she talked about starting with local issues. And what jumped to mind for me was I live in Lebanon County, which is a pretty red county in Pennsylvania. And we just had county commissioner election, and even the Republican candidates talked about preserving farmland because there's a lot of warehouses that have been coming into the area and what was former rural farmland. And so it seems like there's common interest on the left and the right in preserving that farmland. And I wondered if there's been any national work or if there is anything like in the Farm Bill somehow that would be about preserving farmland or regulating development in that way.
Yes, most definitely. So that would relate to the conservation titles specifically for the conservation program of preserving more of our rural lands from encroachment on development. So this isn't just preserving like our farmland to keep it productive, but to create more of a buffer because they're really looking into our agricultural practices for things like water conservation, habitat and wildlife conservation as well. And I, having listened into some of the Senate agriculture hearings around these issues, I'll say that there is robust bipartisan interest into doing something positive for the environment through the Farm Bill. So that's definitely a great place to agriculture is often a good way, especially when we're dealing with more like conservative members. That's often a good way to start pushing for more environmental protections, because farmers understand the importance of having healthy lands, clean water, a predictable climate. You know, like their livelihoods are dependent on being able to count on weather patterns, making sure that, you know, conditions are right for a good crop. So often there's a way to make a good conservation argument, and the Farm Bill is a great opportunity for that because it kind of brings all interest together, whether they're a urban based representative or a rural based representative. We all have a stake in our food system that way. And I also wanted to lift, yeah. Oh, sorry.
You said there's something called the conservation titles.
Yes, so the Farm Bill is a big piece of legislation that has multiple titles, and it doesn't deal just with farms. In fact, like 80% of what the money, it's a funding bill. So 80% of the funds set aside actually go into like nutritional assistance programs, but they do have titles that are focused on rural development, which also includes things like rural housing, electrification of rural areas, obviously our agriculture system, not just for food, but things like bioproducts and all of that. And so there's a conservation title that's about preserving lands, some of them public lands, specifically for agricultural purposes, but also there are some environmental and energy considerations in there as well.
Thanks. So a title is part of a bill, is a
Yeah, it's like a
section of a bill.
subsection of a bill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty unique to the Farm Bill. Farm Bill has 12 titles.
Well, thank you, Michael and Thaddeus. You've given us a lot of information, a lot of things to think about, and we really appreciate your being with us.
Thank you. Blessings in your work. Know that we're
Thank
here
you.
and always happy to partner.
Thank you. We will keep that in mind, and I'm sure this is being recorded, so there'll be other people and churches from our conference that will in the next few weeks be watching this as well. So
Great.
the word will get out.
Okay,
Right.
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye. Nice to see you all.
Libby, I think it's 8:02.
Yes, it is. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, everybody, for hanging with us. Great topics. It's time to close our workshop, but if anybody wants to stay on and have more questions and answer, please do. And we thank you so much for attending this. And we hope that this workshop has given you some inspiration to consider sharing with the church and sharing the church guide and the faith-filled citizenship with a few folks that you might know in your congregation who might want to join you in thinking about justice issues, thinking about things that you can do within your church community to be able to reach out to your elected officials to take an active role in the democracy and by speaking up for the good of all. So thank you so much. And is there anything that we want to do? Your invitation is that we would want you to, if you're interested, there is a PCC justice team. And if you want to review and join them, be a part of it with your church, please do.